Antifa messed with the wrong mother, and what happened next will leave you stunned.
White supremacy is not the problem. Boys were not the problem. Antifa, Black Bloc are the ones who threw bombs, mortars, and pepper spray at me and my children.
Some protesters thought they could silence Andy Ngo, but they only made him stronger. And when a MAGA flag hit the streets, Antifa quickly realized they had messed with the wrong people. These are 10 times Antifa messed with the wrong patriots. The Andy Ngo attack. It was a bright summer day in Portland, Oregon on July 6, 2019, but for journalist Andy Ngo, the sunlight quickly turned into something much darker. Portland, a city already infamous for its ideological clashes, became the backdrop for an attack that would make national headlines. Ngo, a conservative journalist known for his reporting on Antifa, had spent months documenting the violent tactics of far-left extremists. On this particular day, he found himself in the midst of a protest where two sides, Antifa and the Proud Boys, came face to face. But as he focused his camera, it wasn't the protesters he was concerned about. It was the very group he had been covering for months. Antifa, already hostile toward him for his coverage, had identified Ngo and made him their target. What followed was an unprovoked attack that would leave him with lasting physical and emotional scars. As he walked through the crowd, his GoPro camera capturing the unfolding chaos, militants from Antifa targeted him directly. It began with a verbal assault. Insults hurled his way. Fascist, go home you pig, but words were only the beginning. Soon, bear mace was sprayed into his face, blinding him temporarily and burning his skin. Milkshakes, often used by protesters as weapons, were thrown, covering his body and camera. His GoPro lens was obstructed as the fluid splattered across it, but this didn't stop him from documenting. Things escalated further as Antifa militants launched a physical assault. Fists, kicks, and even batons were used to strike him. Despite the brutal nature of the attack, Ngo kept his camera rolling, capturing every painful second of the assault. His determination to continue documenting showed the resilience he had developed throughout his career, but his injuries were no less serious.
Well, I can speak that there weren't phantoms who beat me severely in 2019 to the point where I was bleeding out of my ears and from my eyes and suffered a brain bleed. Those injuries were real.
Ngo suffered a subarachnoid hemorrhage, a condition caused by blunt force trauma to the head, and he was rushed to the hospital. Despite the horrific attack, Ngo didn't retreat. He shared his story publicly, and his footage went viral across social media platforms. Instead of silencing him, the attack catapulted Ngo to fame. His book, Unmasked: Inside Antifa's Radical Plan to Destroy Democracy, became a bestseller. His Twitter following soared, and his voice became one of the loudest in the conservative media space. In a way, Antifa's assault backfired. While they hoped to silence him, they had inadvertently given him a much bigger platform to continue his fight. Antifa had messed with the wrong patriot. Rather than retreating into obscurity, Ngo became a figurehead for conservative resistance against left-wing extremism. While Antifa thought they could silence Andy Ngo, they were in for a shock when another patriot took a stand with a flag. Paul Welch flag incident. It's rare for a city like Portland, known for its progressive ideals, to become a flashpoint for political violence. But on August 4, 2018, an incident involving Paul Welch, a progressive patriot, would highlight the fractured nature of modern American politics. Portland's streets were filled with left-wing activists clashing with right-wing groups like the Patriot Prayer movement, but it was Welch's American flag, a symbol many on the left had long rejected, that would spark a brutal confrontation. Welch wasn't your typical conservative. A Democrat and Bernie Sanders supporter, he had never been a part of the far right, but his connection to the symbol of the American flag made him a target for Antifa. On this day, he was carrying the flag not as a weapon, but as a statement. For him, the flag was a symbol of unity, not division. He wanted to show that the American flag belonged to everyone, not just right-wing extremists. But for Antifa militants, the American flag was something they couldn't tolerate. As Welch proudly displayed the flag during the protest, a group of Antifa militants confronted him. They demanded he hand over the flag, calling it a symbol of oppression. When Welch refused, the situation quickly escalated into a physical confrontation. The attack on Welch wasn't just about a flag, it was about a misunderstanding of what the flag represented. As Welch stood his ground, the militants grew more aggressive. Flash bombs were thrown, and pepper spray was deployed. Welch was struck in the head by a club and knocked to the ground, but he remained determined to protect the flag. It wasn't long before Welch's story went viral. Videos of the confrontation spread across social media, media, showing Antifa's violent tactics. The story of a progressive man being attacked by Antifa for simply carrying the flag was too compelling to ignore. For many, this wasn't just an attack on Welch, it was an attack on the very idea of American patriotism. Instead of silencing him, the assault brought even more attention to Welch. Conservative outlets hailed him as a hero for standing up against Antifa, while left-wing groups were left to explain their increasingly violent tactics. If Antifa thought a flag was their only target, they were wrong. This next case shows how they messed with a mother's resolve. Jamie Anatello's BLM confrontation. Portland has always been a city of political activism, but it took a heartbreaking turn in August 2021 when Jamie Anatello, a black Christian mother, found herself caught in a violent clash that shook her to the core. Anatello had attended a Christian prayer rally in Portland's Tom McCall waterfront park with her family, hoping for a peaceful day of prayer and community, but what transpired was anything but peaceful. Antifa militants, who had been known to disrupt rallies they deemed fascist, were intent on sowing chaos at the event. The confrontation escalated when Antifa militants began throwing eggs, bottles, and chemical weapons into the crowd. The atmosphere turned toxic quickly, with flashbangs exploding and pepper spray filling the air. Anatello, who was holding her 8-month-old daughter, felt the sting of the chaos as the rally she attended in faith was marred by violence. But the true horror came when a flash bomb was thrown directly toward her baby's face.
White supremacy is not the problem. Boys were not the problem. Antifa Black Bloc are the ones who threw bombs, mortars, and pepper spray at me and my children. My baby girl, 8 years old, nearly was hit in the face with an explosive by white people.
Thankfully, a family friend stepped in front of the blast, absorbing the impact. Anatello, filled with panic, immediately shielded her children from the escalating violence. What followed was a viral moment of clarity. Anatello didn't back down. She confronted Antifa's violence head-on, exposing them for attacking an innocent family-focused prayer rally. Her story spread rapidly across social media and conservative platforms, where she became a symbol of the strength of mothers standing up against violent extremists. Her message was simple: if Black Lives Matter to Antifa, why were they attacking her black family at a peaceful prayer rally? In interviews and public appearances, Anatello showed incredible resilience. She made her voice heard in a press conference where she boldly confronted Antifa and their supporters. She brought attention to the unprovoked violence her family had faced and demanded accountability. Her bravery exposed the hypocrisy of those who claimed to stand for justice but were the perpetrators of violence themselves. But if Antifa thought they could intimidate a family, they were soon met by a whole crowd of patriots who weren't backing down. Portland ICE facility brawl. On October 3, 2025, a violent brawl outside the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement ICE facility in Portland, Oregon, turned into an explosive moment in the ongoing ideological war that had plagued the city for years. This wasn't just another protest, it was a scene that would set the tone for the escalating tensions between far-left extremists and right-wing patriots, one where Antifa's aggression would meet an unexpectedly formidable response. The day began like so many others, a typical Portland protest where emotions ran high on both sides. Antifa militants, dressed in their signature black bloc attire, had gathered outside the ICE building, protesting the Trump administration's aggressive immigration policies. Armed with shields, signs, and megaphones, they shouted slogans and threw eggs at the facility's walls, as was customary in Portland protests. At the same time, the federal agents guarding the ICE facility stood behind their fences, trying to keep the protesters from entering. The tension was palpable. Both sides knew that this day would be different. As dusk approached, the counter-protesters, including a group of patriots, arrived. They weren't part of any organized group like the Proud Boys, but they were passionate individuals who strongly opposed Antifa's tactics. These patriots weren't looking to start trouble, but they weren't about to back down either. Live streaming the chaos, they filmed every moment of the protest to share with their supporters, determined to shed light on what they considered the unchecked violence of far-left militants. Among them was Charlie Kirk, a man whose Freedom shirt and GoPro camera were symbolic of his attempt to document the insanity that seemed to be unfolding around him. As Antifa militants escalated their attacks, the brawl began. Small jabs and insults exchanged, followed by pushing and shoving. But the real trigger came when a member of Antifa, known for his aggressive rhetoric and chaotic behavior, launched a surprise attack. What followed was a scuffle of wild proportions. The two men circled each other, each trying to land a decisive blow, but Kirk had the advantage of experience. He wasn't just some passive observer. As the fight continued, Kirk's measured movements presence and sturdy frame held up against the unpredictability of his assailants' wild attacks. It wasn't just a physical fight, it was a battle for ideological superiority on the streets of Portland. The crowd began to chant as the skirmish raged on, "Stand your ground!" At one point, the Antifa militant attempted to grab Kirk, but the Patriot broke free, delivering a devastating right cross that connected with the man's jaw, sending him to the ground. The sound of the punch was audible even over the chants and jeers from the crowd. The man was dazed, and as he tried to stand, he was quickly surrounded by his own allies, who attempted to shield him from further harm. Kirk, however, stood tall, proud of his victory and unbothered by the pain. Now, Antifa thought they could outsmart the Proud Boys, but what they didn't know was they were walking into a trap set by Patriots. Proud Boys' fake rally trap. It was an ingenious move, one that showed the brilliance of psychological warfare. On September 26, 2020, the Proud Boys, a notorious far-right group, decided to play a game of tactical deception with Antifa, and they succeeded in a big way. The Proud Boys had long been at odds with Antifa, regularly clashing during protests across the Pacific Northwest. But this time, instead of showing up for a physical confrontation, they lured Antifa into a trap. The Proud Boys announced a massive rally in Portland, claiming they would be taking back the streets and reclaiming the city from what they considered Antifa's control. The rally was carefully planned, with social media posts, encrypted Telegram channels, and a few well-placed flyers, enough to make Antifa believe this would be a showdown they couldn't miss. Proud Boys leaders promised a large turnout, including appearances from high-profile figures like Joey Gibson of Patriot Prayer, and they even hinted at an impending Patriot surge through downtown Portland. The bait was set: a public park, a vague time, and a promise of special guests. Antifa took the bait almost immediately. Activists, many of whom had been looking for an opportunity to confront the Proud Boys, began assembling early in the day. By noon, over 100 counter-protesters, a mix of Antifa militants and BLM supporters, had arrived at the supposed rally location, but the Proud Boys were nowhere to be found. Frustration mounted as Antifa waited in vain for the rally to begin. The crowd grew restless. Black Bloc militants checked their phones, nervously looking around. Rocks were thrown at nearby benches, water bottles were hurled at innocent bystanders, and some individuals began to target random parkgoers, assuming they were members of the Proud Boys. Videos posted on social media showed Antifa members approaching strangers, asking, "Are you one of them?" While the Proud Boys stayed miles away, watching the chaos unfold, the counter-protesters began to lose their cool. The Proud Boys' plan had worked flawlessly. Antifa was now infiltrating itself, creating chaos where none existed. As frustration turned into anger, some of the counter-protesters began to fight amongst themselves. Antifa militants broke into factions. One group wanted to march downtown and search for the non-existent Proud Boys, while another group suggested they remain at the park. Arguments broke out, and videos began to surface, showing Antifa militants shoving and yelling at one another. What began as a coordinated effort to confront the Proud Boys quickly devolved into infighting. This trap wasn't just physical, it was psychological. The Proud Boys had manipulated their opponents into fighting each other, turning Antifa's aggression inward. By the time the police arrived, after receiving tips about the growing violence, 7 Antifa militants were arrested for disorderly conduct and vandalism. But while Antifa was duped by a fake rally, this next case shows how even the smallest symbol can escalate their anger. Pepe Pin silly string escalation. In the summer of 2019, Portland was once again a battlefield. But this time, the battle wasn't over political slogans or rallies, it was over a small Pepe the Frog pin. The cartoon character, which had been co-opted by the alt-right as a symbol of rebellion, was now the flashpoint for an escalating conflict. On August 17, 2019, at a rally in Portland, the Proud Boys and Antifa were set for another confrontation. Among the crowd, one individual, let's call him Jake, decided to wear a Pepe pin on his shirt. For Jake, it was an ironic nod to internet culture, but to Antifa, it was a symbol of far-right extremism. The situation escalated quickly. As soon as Antifa militants spotted the pin, they zeroed in on Jake. What followed was an overreaction that spiraled into chaos. A can of silly string was sprayed on Jake's chest, followed by eggs, and even a skateboard was swung at him. The situation seemed absurd. Over a pin, Antifa militants became unhinged. The absurdity of it all became even more apparent as the skirmish continued, with Jake, unfazed, filming the entire incident. His calm demeanor in the face of such petty violence only made the militants look more ridiculous. In the end, Antifa's overreaction to the EpiPen exposed their growing sense of paranoia. Jake's refusal to retreat, combined with the absurdity of the situation, turned the tables. Rather than making Jake retreat or back down, the incident went viral, with conservatives mocking the absurdity of Antifa's reaction to an internet meme. If Antifa thought a pin was enough to provoke Patriots, they were wrong. This time, they went after two prominent figures. Philly attack on Kirk and Owens. Philadelphia, known for its rich history and political significance, became the backdrop for a shocking confrontation on August 6, 2018. For Charlie Kirk and Candace Owens, two of the most vocal and influential conservative figures, a routine stop at a local cafe for a coffee quickly escalated into a dangerous encounter with Antifa militants. The attack, which unfolded in the heart of Center City, was a chilling reminder of the increasingly violent tactics used by far-left groups to silence conservative voices. Kirk and Owens, both leaders of the influential Turning Point USA (TPUSA) movement, had made their presence felt across the country with their outspoken criticisms of the left. Their national tours, advocating for free speech, conservative values, and the importance of standing up to political correctness, had already sparked protests at several universities. But this was different. This was personal. The cafe where they were enjoying a quick coffee became the epicenter of a volatile political storm. It all started when news spread that Kirk and Owens were in the city. The left-wing activist group Antifa, known for its militant tactics against anyone it deemed a fascist or far-right extremist, mobilized quickly. By the time the pair had finished their coffee and were preparing to leave, a group of around 30-50 Antifa militants had gathered outside the cafe. They were ready to confront Kirk and Owens, their intentions clear: silence them through intimidation. As Kirk and Owens exited the cafe, they were immediately met with a barrage of insults and verbal abuse. "Fascist scum" and "go back to where you came from" were just a few of the slogans shouted in their direction. The BAF mob didn't stop there. They pressed up against the windows, banging on them and creating a physical barrier to prevent the pair from leaving the area. The chaotic scene was being filmed by several Antifa militants, eager to create viral moments for their cause. But things didn't end with just words. As tensions escalated, the situation quickly turned physical. One protester threw a drink through the open door of the cafe, splashing Owens. Another individual threw a crumpled flyer, which struck Kirk's shoulder.
Water thrown on myself, they threw an egg at me, and here's the interesting part. Candace and I were just minding our own business. We were just having, quiet breakfast, and they mobilized within 20 or 30 minutes, at least 50 of them, came into the restaurant, started calling Candace a Nazi, which I can't quite figure out how on earth they would come to that conclusion.
The crowd pressed in, continuing to shout, and Antifa militants banged on the cafe windows, trying to provoke a response. The aggression was evident, and the left-wing militants were out for blood, an attempt to provoke violence that could justify further escalation. But Kirk and Owens, well-versed in dealing with hostile crowds, didn't take the bait. They didn't flee, and they didn't engage in violence. Instead, they continued to film, keeping their cool as they documented the incident. And of course, the culprits paid the price. Now, Antifa tried to tear down a symbol of American pride, but they were about to meet patriots who wouldn't let that happen. MAGA flag in Antifa riot. The sun was setting over the streets of Portland on September 30th, 2025, when the MAGA flag, a symbol of conservative defiance, became the focal point of an unexpected and violent confrontation. The city, long known for its ideological battles between left-wing activists and conservative forces, was once again the stage for a political brawl. But this time, it was about much more than just a piece of cloth. It was about ideals, symbols, and a bold display of patriotism in a city that had come to symbolize left-wing resistance. The day began with the usual tension. Antifa had gathered outside the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement (ICE) facility in Portland, rallying against the Trump administration's deportation policies. They were chanting slogans like "No borders, no cages" and "Abolish ICE," while throwing eggs at the facility's walls and attempting to block the entry points to the building. Across the street, a small group of patriots, many wearing MAGA hats and waving flags, countered the protesters. They weren't there to start a fight, but they were there to show that America and its values still had a place in Portland, despite the overwhelming liberal sentiment in the city. The situation remained tense but peaceful for the most part. The MAGA flag, a bright red banner with "Make America Great Again" emblazoned on it, waved in the air like a beacon for the counter-protesters. However, the Antifa militants, seeing the flag as a symbol of everything they opposed, quickly descended on it. Shouting obscenities and calling it a symbol of fascism, they began to advance toward the flag bearer, determined to take it down. What followed followed was a chaotic scene of aggressive behavior from the Antifa militants. They pushed, shoved, and physically confronted the MAGA flag bearers in an attempt to rip the flag away from their hands. Flashbangs were thrown, pepper spray filled the air, and batons were swung in a melee that lasted for what seemed like hours. The clash escalated rapidly as both sides grew more agitated, with Antifa attempting to seize the MAGA flag and use it as a tool of symbolic victory. The violence continued as the two sides clashed, but eventually, Portland police arrived to restore order. They were quickly overwhelmed by the number of protesters, but they did their best to separate the two groups and prevent further violence. But Antifa wasn't prepared for the locals in Yucaipa, who stood their ground, showing them what happens when they mess with small-town patriots. Yucaipa locals versus protesters. The small, quiet town of Yucaipa, California, was about to become the stage for a confrontation that would capture the essence of America's polarized political climate. On June 1st, 2020, the nation was still reeling from the death of George Floyd, and protests were erupting across the country. While most of the protests in large cities like Los Angeles and San Francisco had turned violent, Yucaipa, a conservative enclave nestled in the foothills of the San Bernardino Mountains, had remained relatively calm. However, that all changed when a group of around 100 protesters, some claiming to be part of Antifa, gathered in the town to demand racial justice and protest police brutality. What they didn't anticipate was the strong resistance from the local community, a community that valued its freedom and was fiercely protective of its way of life. By 6 p.m., word had spread like wildfire that a group of armed locals had gathered near Yucaipa Boulevard, ready to confront the protesters. These were not organized militias, but rather everyday working-class citizens, mechanics, retirees, and small business owners, all united by their desire to defend their town against what they viewed as an outsider intrusion. Many of these locals were armed, with AR-15s, shotguns, and handguns slung over their shoulders. MAGA hats, "Don't Tread on Me" t-shirts, and thin blue line patches were visible among the crowd. The leader of the group, a grizzled ex-Marine named Dan, had organized the protest response using a local gun club's text chain. Dan, wearing a grey beard and a "Don't Tread on Me" shirt, stood at the forefront, commanding his group with military precision. As the protesters marched down Yucaipa Boulevard, they were met with the sight of these armed civilians standing their ground. It didn't take long for the protesters to realize they had made a mistake. This was not a community they could intimidate. As the two sides faced off, the atmosphere grew charged with hostility. Shouting ensued, with racial epithets from some locals and calls for justice from the protesters. However, the locals didn't advance. They simply held their ground, waiting for the protesters to make the next move. In a tense standoff, the locals advanced, guns raised, shouting at the protesters to leave. "This is our town!" Dan yelled, his voice booming through the air. The protesters, not prepared for this level of armed resistance, began to scatter, retreating from the area. The confrontation was over almost as quickly as it had begun. No shots were fired, and the locals didn't pursue. Their point had been made. The protesters, who had expected to challenge the local community, found themselves overwhelmed and forced to retreat. Now, Antifa thought they could taunt patriots at a vigil, but they soon found out that messing with these patriots was a mistake. Boston flag taunt at Kirk Vigil. On September 14, 2025, Boston Common became a battleground of ideals when a memorial vigil for Charlie Kirk, the conservative firebrand and founder of Turning Point USA, was disrupted by Antifa militants. The vigil, held by Kirk's supporters, was meant to honor his legacy and stand for conservative values, attracting around 200 mourners. But Antifa, a group increasingly known for disrupting conservative events, had other plans. As the vigil's attendees stood beneath candles and flags, many of them draped in the American flag, Antifa militants, numbering about 50, marched into the scene. Their goal was clear: to taunt and provoke the mourners, who they deemed as adherents of fascism. Armed with megaphones and spray-painted signs, they shouted insults like "fuck your fascist," "hero," and "Kirk's burning in hell." Among the vigil's attendees was Mike, a local Bostonian who had come to pay his respects to Kirk. Mike, not a member of any specific group but a staunch conservative, carried with him a large American flag, its bold red and white stripes waving defiantly in the wind. As Antifa's verbal assault grew louder, Mike stepped forward, waving the flag with unshakable calm. The flag's movement cut through the chaos, a symbol of patriotism and defiance in the face of hate. Antifa, anticipating a fight, tried to close in, but Mike didn't back down. He planted his flagpole in front of the most vocal Antifa member and with a steady hand began to wave it in slow, deliberate arcs, pushing the militant back with nothing more than the weight of his conviction and a symbol of American pride. This simple act of defiance was more than enough to make the taunts fizzle out. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed watching this video, click on one of the boxes playing on your screen to watch more similar content.